be made. Alok Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I refer the House to my registered members' interests. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I agree with the Secretary of State, who I hold in high regard. The United Kingdom has been a leader in climate action internationally. We have cut our emissions in half over the past 30 years, faster than any other major economy in recent years, and we've set ambitious domestic emission reduction targets, particularly ahead of COP26. And through our COP26 presidency, we managed to get over 90% of the global economy signed up to net zero. Just about every G20 nation signed up to a net zero commitment. We led on climate action domestically, and we translate that into leading the world on climate action. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, just a few weeks ago at COP28, the UK, alongside other nations, signed up to transition away from fossil fuels. And on his return from COP28, my right honourable friend, the member for Beverley and Holderness, welcomed this global agreement from the dispatch box. He spoke about the importance of listening to the voices of the most climate-vulnerable island nations, who, as we know, wanted the world to agree to stronger language, to phase out fossil fuels. Indeed, my right honourable friend himself tweeted at COP28, there must be a phase-out of unabated fossil fuels to meet our climate goals. And I commend the work that he, indeed the whole of the UK team, did in Dubai. But today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have a bill before this House, the sole purpose of which is to double down on granting more oil and gas production licenses. I do not believe, and it pains me to say this, that this bill will advance that commitment to transition away from fossil fuels. I also do not believe that those climate-vulnerable nations that my right honourable friend referred to will think this bill is consistent with the pledge that we, along with every other nation, made in Dubai. Now, in terms of substance of the bill, as it's currently drafted, and I'm really sorry to say this, it really does pain me to say this, that I think it is somewhat of a distraction, because I don't think it's necessary. The North Sea Transition Authority can already grant licenses annually, or indeed when they think it necessary, and they've been doing that regularly over the past few years. The Department's own explanatory notes accompanying this bill make clear, and I quote, the NSTA will remain free to grant licenses outside this new annual duty in the usual way, whether or not the new statutory tests are met. And as for the two statutory tests, they seem to override the already non-binding climate compatibility checkpoint. And I have to say this, that I think they have been designed in a way for the computer to always say yes to new oil and gas licenses. Overall, the ability of the NSTA to grant new licenses does not change materially with this bill. But sadly, what this bill does do, and this is my opinion, and others will have theirs, it does do is to reinforce the unfortunate perception about the UK rowing back from climate action, as indeed we saw last autumn with the chopping and changing of some policies. And it does make our international partners question the seriousness with which we take our international commitments. And I say that it pains me to say this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because I know the government has been coming forward under this Secretary of State with commitments to try and tackle climate change, to try and deliver on a clean energy transition. Now, we've also heard that this bill is about improving domestic energy security. But I think we all understand that the oil and gas extracted from the North Sea is owned by private enterprises, and the government doesn't get to control who this is sold to. And in addition, I think it's acknowledged that this bill would not necessarily lower domestic energy bills in the UK. That price for oil and gas as a commodity is set internationally. I think the best way to enhance our energy security and ultimately bring down bills is for the government to continue to deliver on its ambitious plans for expanding homegrown clean energy, which I know the Secretary of State and her ministers are absolutely committed to. More wind power, more solar, more nuclear, as part of a diversified clean energy mix. And I back the Secretary of State in the work that she and her team are doing in delivering that clean energy mix. Now, in terms of jobs, we've heard about the bill securing 200,000 jobs. Of course, Mr. Speaker, people's jobs and livelihoods absolutely matter, and we have to ensure that we secure jobs. But we also have to recognise that we're in an energy transition. I support an orderly transition. For me, this isn't about turning off the taps overnight on oil and gas. And we do have to acknowledge that over 200,000 jobs supported by the oil and gas industry have been lost over the past decade. And that is despite hundreds of new drilling licenses being issued. Now, we also know that many of the skills used in the oil and gas sector are transferable to clean energy, to offshore wind, to geothermal. And if we want to truly turbocharge a clean energy transition, we need to help support and retrain those workers transitioning over time out of the fossil fuel sector into the many tens of thousands of jobs that are being created in clean energy as a result of the work the Secretary of State and her team are doing. Yes, of course.
I thank him for giving way, and he's making some very powerful points, and I have huge respect for him on this topic. Does he agree with me that we are in real danger of turning off the interest and investment appetite from many other nations, Korea, Japan and others, who see the UK as having vast expertise in offshore wind development sites, and that this kind of announcement, this legislation, will undermine that market?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was some commentary in terms of concerns about investment appetite following some of the statements that were made in the autumn. But I think we also have to acknowledge that the government has, over the last few months, managed to get billions of pounds rather, of extra investment committed within clean energy to the UK. But I want to turn to the carbon intensity test for granting new licenses. And I have to say again that I'm not sure they recognise the whole picture of where we get our imports from. The majority of gas the UK imports comes by pipeline from Norway. It isn't imported LNG. And the carbon intensity of Norwegian gas production is around half that of UK domestic gas. So if that is the test that the government wants to apply in deciding whether to issue new licenses, I think it should take into account the average carbon intensity of all imported gas, not just LNG. And given that around 70% of remaining North Sea reserves are oil, perhaps the test should also include the carbon intensity of UK-produced oil, which is higher than the global average. Yes, of course.
I put that very point that he has raised there to the Secretary of State in our Select Committee, and her response was that because almost all of our oil is exported out of the UK for processing, we don't know what the full carbon intensity is. Is this not a great example of why our oil is not actually used in Britain, and it will not help British people?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has set out her position very clearly and eloquently. What I'm trying to do is set out my position, I see it, on this bill. But just to move to this point about the Climate Change Committee, and I think the government said that the Independent Climate Change Committee's own data shows that we're going to need new oil and gas in the decades ahead. But I just respectfully say that this isn't the same as saying that new licenses should be granted. And the weekend before this bill was originally due to have its second reading, the interim chair of the Climate Change Committee put out a tweet to reconfirm the Climate Change Committee's position, and he wrote, "The CCC UK evidence is that continued expansion of new oil and gas reserves is inconsistent with our climate commitments, especially more so in light of the recent global stocktake COP agreement we have just signed." Mr. Speaker, for the reasons that I've outlined, I will not vote for this bill today. But assuming that this bill does proceed beyond second reading, I hope it will be possible, working with like-minded colleagues and indeed the government and the Secretary of State and her ministers, to amend and improve the tests that are required to be met before any new oil and gas production licence are granted in the future. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, delivering on the UK's clean energy transition matters on many levels: for jobs, for inward investment, for lower bills, for real energy security, and of course, for the environment. We've seen the impacts of the changing climate around us daily. 2023 was the hottest year on record globally. In recent weeks, many people have faced flooding again in our country, including in my own constituency. We really shouldn't need any more wake-up calls to put aside the distractions and act with the urgency the situation demands.
Dave Dugan.